Welcome back to Fear the Dark. Love is one of the most powerful emotions a person can feel. It drives us to create, to improve ourselves, and to do things that are truly remarkable. But love has a dark side. For some, love gives way to dark desires and unhealthy obsessions that consumes the mind and the soul. Such is the case with tonight's tale. So sit back, relax, and get ready to fear the dark. I hope you all have a very happy Valentine's Day. Obsession. Kelsey Bright was by all accounts a despicable human being. If you ask me what I hated most about her, I don't know if I could pinpoint exactly what I found most repulsive. Maybe it was the way she tossed her shiny metal credit card at me when I was bagging her groceries. Maybe it was the way she clicked her perfectly manicured nails against the key fob of her Tesla while I finished the transaction for her. It could have been the fact that she let her 3 brats run rampant through my grocery store, destroying every display their grubby little hands touched, while she looked on with complete and total disinterest. Kelsey was notorious for being a burning dumpster fire in the small town we called home. At the ripe old age of 18, she'd married a well-renowned plastic surgeon, 3 decades her senior, and at 25 years old she'd had 3 awful children with him, aged 6, 4 and 3. Kelsey had an insatiable appetite for Chardonnay and mimosas, much to the dismay of the town's local brunch spots, and she had a nasty reputation for getting into screaming matches with their nanny. Word travels fast in a small town like ours, and Kelsey was frequently a topic of conversation. She'd taken to selling Avon over social media in an attempt to convince her husband that she was doing something with the massive allowance he gave her. Of course, most of the makeup that she purchased to resell only ended up in her personal cosmetics collection. When she wasn't pushing her makeup business on anyone who would listen, she was buzzing around the local bar looking for a boyfriend to occupy her time and her bed. Like I said, Kelsey Bright was a total dumpster fire of a woman. Kelsey happened to be a regular customer at my store, and I was nearly always the employee she chose to victimize. With every interaction, her attitude towards me worsened, and it became harder and harder to grit my teeth and smile. But my bosses were watching, and they didn't dare cross a woman as wealthy as Kelsey Bright. The rest of the town was quite poor, and to lose her business would be horribly detrimental to our little store's bottom line. After dealing with her, I would go home thinking about her, blood boiling as I replayed her interactions over and over in my mind. I'd think of witty comebacks to her snide comments and backhanded compliments, then lament the fact that I'd never get to use them against her. Everything the woman did made me impossibly angry, yet the thought of her wouldn't leave my mind. I went to bed thinking of her and woke up with her on my mind. It was an odd sort of infatuation, and one I'd never experienced before. I decided one evening after a few too many drinks that something needed to be done about Kelsey Bright. I needed her off my mind once and for all. I needed to stop thinking about the curves of her body, the way she smirked instead of smiled at me any time I spoke to her, the way her long blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders. That was my only goal, to get her off of my mind. You could say I failed miserably at that, and you'd be right. Through a bit of a Facebook search, I was able to track down her address, 750 Summerfield Lane. She lived in a palatial home tucked away in a little cul-de-sac, the largest house in the town's nicest subdivision. My old Toyota Camry looked out of place, parked among the shiny new cars that lined the street. But if the neighborhood watch took notice of me, they certainly didn't say anything. Night after night, I parked across the street from Kelsey's house and took pictures of everything I could. Before long, I had a nice little bulletin board at home, filled with images of Kelsey, her husband, her home, her cars, even her 3 evil little children. Creating that bulletin board was almost cathartic in a way. I bought a set of darts and used the pictures of her for target practice. Of course, that meant I needed to take new pictures to replace the old ones, so it went. I discovered from watching her home that Kelsey went out with a group of friends on Monday nights. Doubtless they were headed to the bar together. A little silver Lexus would park outside her house at around 10 o'clock, when all the lights in the house were off and everyone was in bed. Kelsey would come skipping out to the car in some disgustingly skimpy little outfit. Something possessed me to follow them one night, and that's exactly what I did. Unsurprisingly, the group of women in the Lexus ended up at the bar on the far end of town. I waited outside in the alley, watching and waiting to see how long they stayed and who exactly Kelsey was leaving with. I was there for hours parked in the alley and listening to the radio until nearly 2 a.m. I had expected her to have gone home with another man by then. What I didn't expect was for her to come stumbling out of the bar alone, drunkenly waving down any car that passed by. She slumped against the wall of the building, facing my car as she fumbled with her phone. There was my chance, and I'd be damned if I wasn't going to take it. I pulled a U-turn, drove up next to her, and rolled my window down to speak to her. "Hey there," I called. "Need a ride?" Kelsey looked up at the car, shocked, and teetered over to lean against the door of the car. "My fucking friends left me here and my phone is dead," she complained. God, I thought to myself. She was even awful when she was being offered help. Nevertheless, I gritted my teeth and repeated myself. "Need a ride?" "Oh, yeah," she said. I unlocked the door for her and she climbed into the passenger seat. I watched her clumsily buckle her seatbelt. When she heard it click, she looked up at me and squinted at me, scrunching her pretty little nose. "Hey, I think I recognize you." "From the store," I reminded her. "Yes, from the store," she crowed. "You're the checkout guy." "Name's Patrick," I said. "Now, where are we headed, miss?" I asked, as if I didn't already know exactly where she wanted to go. 750 Summerfield Lane, in the Fox Hill subdivision, she told me. I plugged the address into my GPS and set off into the direction of her home. She was silent as I drove, focusing on the passing trees, and presumably not throwing up all over the inside of my car. From the driver's seat I could smell that she had quite a taste for rum. Kelsey was so focused on the passing trees that she almost didn't notice when, instead of making a right on Oak Street, like the GPS dictated, I turned left and got onto the highway going north. If only the GPS hadn't announced my wrong turn, I might have gotten farther without her head whipping around to face me. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "My house is back that way." "Don't you worry about where we're going, Kelsey," I told her. She froze. "How do you know my name?" "I notice more than you realize," I said simply. "I see you all the time." Kelsey scowled. "Turn this car around right now and take me home." "Or what? You'll call the cops?" "Your phone is dead," I reminded her. She fell silent. Then I sped up to 75 miles per hour and shifted into the left lane. We had a long drive ahead of us, and I wanted to get where we were going as quickly as possible before her inhibition faded and her senses returned to her. Kelsey looked around nervously, glancing at me, and then back to the door, as if she was contemplating jumping out onto the highway. I stole a glance and found her visibly shaking. Good, I thought. After 2 hours on the road, we finally arrived at the cabin my parents had left me in their will. It was a secluded little thing, hidden deep inside a national forest, so there were rarely any visitors. It was perfect. I dragged Kelsey out of the car by her wrist. She struggled a bit, but she was weak, so the act of dragging her into the cabin took little effort on my part. Even if she had struggled out of my grasp, she was too drunk to get away. I admired the light of the fireflies as I picked her up, bridal style, and carried her inside. We went straight for the guest bedroom, a sparsely decorated room with little more than a nightstand, a window, and a bed with a metal frame. I retrieved several pairs of handcuffs from the closet in the room, and turned back to my new captive. It was easy enough to handcuff Kelsey to the bed. She was still too weak to fight back. At this point, tears were rolling down her cheeks. She pleaded with me to let her go and take her home. I remained silent. It occurred to Kelsey then that screaming might help her get away from me. The woman let out a blood-curdling shriek, then another, in a desperate attempt to get the attention of someone, anyone. It was no use. The closest neighbour was 5 miles down the road, and they were likely gone for the summer. I told her as much, but it didn't stop her from continuing to scream at the top of her lungs. Eventually, after what felt like hours, her voice went hoarse and she could no longer scream. I thanked my lucky stars for the silence, and left the room to prepare dinner. While there were steaks, chicken, and all kinds of frozen vegetables in the freezer, there wasn't much in the way of easy-to-prepare food. I dug through the pantry and found little more than rice and beans, but I figured it would do. When it was done cooking, I brought a small bowl to Kelsey and offered to feed it to her. The bitch turned her nose up at me and refused the meal. I wasn't shocked by her behaviour, but I was furious. I threw the bowl at her head as hard as I could. It missed by a few inches and exploded into a million pieces of ceramic shrapnel. Kelsey whimpered as the broken bowl and its contents tumbled to the ground behind her. "If you won't eat what I make, then you can fucking starve," I told her. She cried silently as I left the room again, to gather my thoughts. I ate the remainder of the food on the stovetop and decided that Kelsey could go without food for a few days. Starvation might whet her appetite. Over the next few days, I visited Kelsey in the guest bedroom frequently. I'd sit by the bedside, asking her questions about her life, her family, any topic I could think of to try and stimulate conversation. Without fail, I was met with silence and a cold glare. She was not a cooperative person. I decided that if she wouldn't cooperate, then I was going to make her life absolute hell. Never once did I unchain her from the bed to use the bathroom, something I might have considered doing if she'd been willing to communicate with me, in a method other than scowls and wails for help. I took great pleasure in cooking elaborate home-cooked meals and consuming them gluttonously in front of her. The pleading look in her eyes as I finished steaks, roasted vegetables, and plates of grilled chicken was almost rewarding. Day after day, the misery I inflicted on her began to show more and more. Still, she was not desperate enough to speak to me. Eventually, I grew tired of trying to get her to talk to me about her life. I no longer cared to learn about her kids, her daily routine, or her makeup business. Instead, I made it a point to tear her down at every opportunity. I wanted to see that pretty little face streaked with tears. So instead of asking inane questions about her likes or dislikes, or what she did for fun, I started in on her insecurities. "Does your family know you're a whore?" I asked her point blank. Her jaw dropped. Kelsey tried to speak, but no words came out. I continued. "Do they know what an abysmal parent you are? Those 3 brats of yours are the worst behaved children I've ever seen. Probably because they have you to look up to." She shook her head silently. "Or that your business is a complete and utter failure because no one cares about you enough to support you?" A single tear rolled down her cheek. It was all too easy to get under her skin. "And what's it like going home to a husband 3 times your age? What's it like knowing that he only married you for your looks and not because he loves you?" "Stop," she whispered. Poor Kelsey Bright. You're really a fucking mess. Honestly, no one will miss you." "Stop!" she shrieked. After 5 days without food, 5 days of watching me antagonize her and tear her down, she'd had enough. She was so beautiful when she was angry. I loved pushing her to her limit. Kelsey spoke again, quieter this time. Please, stop. I don't know why you're doing this. I don't know why I'm here. I just want to go home and see my family. That's all I want. Please. Why are you doing this?" "Because someone needs to put you in your place," I answered. "You're a monster," she said. "If I'm a monster, it's because you made me one." "What did I ever do to you?" she cried. I hesitated for a moment. Looking back, her transgression seemed relatively minor compared to the punishment she was receiving, but I couldn't help the way things transpired in the end. I chose not to dignify her with an answer. Instead, I took my leave for the night and walked down the hall to the master bedroom to turn in for the night and get some sleep. The next morning, I awoke to Kelsey shrieking again. She'd regained her voice and had started crying out hysterically for anyone nearby to help her. Blinking the sleep from my eyes, I walked down the hall to the guest room to shut her up. After days of leaving her chained up to the bed, the room stunk to high heaven. Still, I wasn't about to open a window for fear of the sound of her shrieks travelling. There was always a small chance that a park ranger was in the area, and I wasn't about to risk getting caught. "Nobody can hear you," I reminded her. "We're in the middle of nowhere, so shut up." Kelsey stopped screaming and turned to face me, scowling deeply. "What did I do to you?" she demanded out of nowhere. "You never answered my question. You at least owe me an explanation. Why am I here? I suppose, I began, that in a strange way I've come to love you, Kelsey. I mean, I hate you, but that hate seems to have given way to a strange sort of, I don't know, obsession? I can't get you off my mind. I want to admire your beauty while I watch you break. Kelsey spat at me, and that is when I lost my mind completely. Something about that gesture made my blood begin to boil. Wiping the spit from my face, I left the room to retrieve a pipe wrench from the garage. I came thundering down the hall towards the guest bedroom, wrench in hand, and slammed it against the doorframe as hard as I could. The wood splintered into 1,000 tiny pieces, leaving a gaping hole behind. Kelsey yelped loudly and struggled against the handcuffs. After several days without food, she was too weak to put up any kind of fight. I walked closer to the bed, pausing at her side to consider the sight before me. There she was, chained up and defenseless, while I held a weapon that could quite possibly kill her. I savored the moment, then I raised the wrench high into the air, pausing to watch her eyes widen in terror, and brought the wrench down on her left kneecap. There was a sickening wet crunch as the pipe wrench made contact with her bone and smashed it into bits. She howled in pain, attempting to curl in on herself and protect her injured knee from further abuse. I raised the wrench above my head again and slammed it as hard as I could into her other knee. This time, the side of her knee was my target, and she screamed in pain again as her right knee shattered. "More where that came from, sweetheart," I told her, raising my voice above her shrill wails. "This is for every time I've had the misfortune of interacting with you," I snarled. I brought the heavy wrench down on her shin, grinning wickedly as she writhed in pain. There was no stopping her screaming, but I was learning to savour it. "And this is what I'd like to do to that pretty little Tesla of yours." Whack! She screamed again as the wrench shattered her other shin. Whack! The sound of bone crunching filled my ears. Her forearm snapped and contorted into an unnatural angle. Whack! Her ribcage was my next target. She gasped and cried as I drove the wrench again and again into her sides with as much force as I could manage. She let out a choked sob as I hit her one final time, then stepped back to take in the sight before me. It was a beautiful sight, watching her wither before me. There was no movement she could make that wouldn't leave her in immense pain, yet her fiery temper flared to life, and she fixed me with the dirtiest look she could give. "Fuck you," she gasped. I hit her square in the jaw. There was a loud snap as her head twisted just a bit too far to one side, and her body fell limp. Her head slumped forward. "Kelsey?" I said. No response. "Kelsey," I repeated. "Wake up!" Nothing. She didn't even twitch. I dropped the wrench and moved to check her pulse. When I was able to verify that there was nothing there, I pulled my hand away and watched her silently. I felt the bile rise in my throat once it occurred to me what I had done. I hadn't meant to kill her, I was just going to teach her a lesson, and no, it would have ended this way no matter what. Looking back, my biggest regret is that I broke her neck too early. There was so much more I wanted to say to her, so much more I wanted to do to her. I would never get the opportunity. It took me a few hours to muster up the will to take Kelsey's handcuffs off. Without her struggling against them, trying to break free, removing them was simple. But all of the satisfaction I felt previously was gone. Free from its restraints, Kelsey's bloodied body flopped forward on the bed, folded in on itself. I hovered in the doorway, watching, almost waiting for her to jump to life and begin her incessant howling again. When nothing happened, I began to contemplate just what to do with her body. In the end, I grabbed a shovel and tossed her over my shoulder, setting off into the woods. After hiking through dense underbrush for the better part of an hour, I found a secluded spot far away from any trail that would work perfectly as a burial site. It was near a small creek, in a spot I often played as a child. I tossed her onto the ground. Her body fell face first into the dirt, and remained crumpled there while I worked. The grave I dug for her was around 3 feet deep, enough, I hoped, to keep the mountain lions and coyotes from digging her back up. With nothing keeping me at the cabin, I carefully cleaned the mess I'd made, that Kelsey made, and got back in my car to make the drive home. Before I hit the road, I sent a single text to my manager, who'd probably been wondering where the hell I was. Sorry for being out of touch, boss. I had a family emergency and needed to visit my mother. My dad passed away last week. It was a bullshit reason, but I was never the creative type when it came to inventing excuses. I only hoped it was enough to save my job. I spent the rest of the day in my apartment, decompressing from everything that had happened. Kelsey was still heavy on my mind. But where there had been a perfect, beautiful face before, only the swollen purple face of her corpse remained. I almost felt remorseful for what I'd done. Almost. The next day, there was an announcement on the news that caught my eye. A local woman missing, search party unsuccessful, flashed across the bottom of the screen. I perked up when I heard the anchorman mention the Bright family. Standing next to him was a balding, middle-aged man, holding a small child. "Kelsey, if you're out there, please come home," the man pleaded. I recognized him as her husband. The small boy in his arms began to cry, and the screen changed to display an image of Kelsey taken from her Facebook account. I turned the TV off and started getting ready for my shift at work. Truthfully, I was nervous to go back after being gone for a week, but when I arrived I was met with sympathy from my co-workers, who had heard from management about my father's passing. "Where were you?" one of the other cashiers asked me. I smiled sadly. "Oh, just taking care of some business upstate." "Sorry to hear about your dad, Patrick, but did you hear about Kelsey Bright going missing?" Another one of my co-workers butted in. "I thought of you since she's normally your customer." "Yeah, I did," I told him. "It's a real shame. I hope she comes back. I'm missing her face around here." That was 6 months ago, but they never did find her body. And that was the obsession. The world is a very dangerous place. Evil lurks around every corner. Be careful who you trust. You never know who may be harboring a secret obsession with you. Subscribe for more content, and don't forget to hit the notification bell for channel updates. Got a story you'd like to share? Don't be afraid to send